I had planned to talk about Richard Ojeda entering the presidential primary, but this caught me completely off guard and I think is more demanding of an immediate response. Um, so, you've probably already by now heard that Stan Lee died, and people are putting out their little tributes and stuff. I would say this is part of a pattern I've noticed where a lot of celebrities in the last year and a half that I actually care about to some extent have just croaked out of, in some cases, out of nowhere, in some cases, theoretically, predictably. So, because of age and all that. We had Adam West die last year, and he was a long time actor, but that was still something you could kind of see coming because of the person's advanced age. With Stan, I just got so used to the idea that he would get sick routinely and then come back, after illness or ailment. And there was a whole scandal earlier this year about the elder abuse and all that. But I'd rather talk about his actual career than, sit here and harp on all the scandals that came out afterward. Well, really, it's only one thing, but that thing I just mentioned there, but whatever. So he began his association with Marvel before it was Marvel, back when it was Timely Comics, and worked as an interim writer. And at that point, he was making stories that had to do with monsters. And he would come up with these different names through sounds and verbal tics that would sell in these different. There's a title for this kind of book where each chapter, or each issue rather, focuses on a different character. Yeah, Dirk, it sucks, but I'm gonna try to cheer you up by talking about him. We want to be glad that he lived as long as he did, rather than died. Oh, I was starting from the beginning of his career when he worked at Timely before it was Marvel. A lot of people in this current era don't know that Marvel used to be called Timely Comics, and that's why there's a whole thing with Captain Marvel being a DC, and people getting confused. Wait, isn't he a Marvel character? No, he was. That was they made him before there was Marvel. But I remember distinctively the way that Spider-Man gets created with Amazing Fantasy issue 15 is that the first 14 issues are part of some book where every issue is about a different character, and the editor that Stan had at that time had little confidence in the character, so he said, "All right, we'll let you put him out, but he's going to be in that issue of that series that's doing really poorly right now." And the issue ended up selling better than they thought, and then they gave him his own title, and the the rest was pretty much history. Yeah, before he had to change his name to Shazam. Yeah, for copyright. That's why with the DC multiverse with Universe 3, where they have all the heroes are bad guys and the bad guys are heroes, instead of getting or rather is it there's an all basically there's a thing where you have a Superwoman and a Batwoman, and they're in some kind of gender flipped universe, but you don't have a Wonder Man because that character already exists. They call it Wonder something else. I forgot what the title was, but it's that same kind of thing where they can't use names that have already been established with somebody else. But anyway, with the what's really funny about having all these iconic characters that have been around for decades is that they're all introduced back to back to back. Like the period of 1962 to maybe early 1964 is just Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, X-Men, just all coming out after each other. And what I found most interesting is that if it weren't for the Justice League, we pretty much wouldn't have the Fantastic Four, because he was inspired to make a team of superheroes from hearing about how successful the Justice League of America had been doing. So that's the beginning of that. And Iron Man was based off of the 20th century historical figure of Howard Hughes. Well, he's a historical figure at this point, but he based his personality and the Tony Stark persona off of that person, and gave Iron Man's dad's first name as the same, so it was Howard as well. Let me see what Dirk you wrote all at once. That's amazing. Yeah, they all just came out back to back, and that's the same thing with Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. They're all introduced 4 years apart. in 1938, 1939 to 1941. So I am not. I know we only talk about political stuff more often than not, but I'm fairly knowledgeable about the publication history of some of these characters, at least how they were created. But going back into this, he steps down as the writer for Marvel altogether in 1972. So his last issues on Amazing Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, like in the early 100s, it's like 110 for Spider-Man and like 150 for 125 for Fantastic Four. So with those two books, he ended up staying on the longest. And if I remember correctly, he leaves X-Men around issue 31, 32. So there's like 3 full years of just reprints of those issues. It's like issue 55 is really issue 25 or something. It's the same story being told over and over because they didn't get a writer or something. A character of its time, the great to see how they evolve. Oh yeah. The other part is that there reportedly, and there's a book. And I really wish I remembered the title. I'll put it in the description box if I can remember the title of it, or rather where I found this information. Apparently, he didn't keep up with all of the characters he made because so in the 70s they have a storyline where all of the X-Men get captured, and they except for Cyclops, and that's when Wolverine and Storm and I think Colossus. I don't quote me on that one, but I know Nightcrawler shows up. Those were when those three really iconic, high-profile X-Men members are first introduced, and they bring Stan back around that time. And he's like, okay, I know Cyclops, but who are the rest of these people? Because he wasn't familiar with any of them. And it almost sucks because if it's 6 different franchises, I don't expect you to remember every nook and cranny of them. Whereas, little kids that are people that aren't familiar with the different writers that these various characters have over time might expect that of him or think that that's something he should do. Which, by the way, I actually forgot to give the origin of the X-Men. He admitted that he was lazy with them because he thought it was redundant to keep having these stories of this person got bit by this person drank this, so they're just born with their powers. That was their whole gimmick, that they were just born with them. They didn't have any freak accidents. So one day you're just walking around and all of a sudden your hands start glowing or something. You get the idea. Let's see. Oh, and then, obviously all the Marvel cameos. What I find most interesting about him as it pertains to those films is that back in the 80s, early 90s, that was when we had, what's the name of that first Batman film? The one that came out in '89. I think it's just called Batman, which we have to stop naming these movies after the character over and over and over again. But that's another point. Anyways, so the artist, the original artist for Batman, Bob Kane, not Bill Finger. That's the original creator, the writer. Used to mock Stan over having all these Batman films come out and saying, haha, my character is doing well at the box office and yours is still on the pages. And then I remember there's a documentary that stands in where he points out that by the time any of his characters got a movie, Kane had died, so he wasn't able to brag back, or at least have finally caught up to him. And he's at this point more than surpassed what he had. Being born is a lot easier than trying to build a character and then give them powers. Yeah. And remember, with all of these different superheroes, you had to introduce the character, the origin, and them, using their powers in 20 pages, or else you weren't able to tell the story. So it's not like I have a 2-hour movie. No, you have you have a few pages, and some artist that hopefully can capture what you're trying to produce or create. Which, by the way, there's a whole scandal with the Bob Kane, Bill Finger, Batman creation thing of who deserves to actually have their name credited and all that. Oh yeah, well, Dirk, it's kind of funny. Even as I said that, I kind of clenched my teeth because I thought to myself, well, Spider-Man's probably on Batman's level of notoriety and popularity, but Batman by himself still was regularly getting a movie every couple of years, be it animation or live action, what, for 20 years now? So Even if you get the idea, like that's the worst one to say. Oh yeah, that doesn't match up with what we have at DC, or rather at Marvel, with our cinematic universe and whatnot. Let's see here. But yeah, it's a sad thing. I remember I actually used to plan on doing a tribute video to him at one point, and I never got around to it because I had all this stuff going on. Um, Not even counting TV shows or reboot. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you put Batman versus all of the different Marvel characters that Stan created, there's no he still could rival uh, a good chunk of the Marvel characters. Is what I'm saying. How did he write his characters? Um, I'm trying to think. The main thing to take away is the fact that he admitted that between when he was working at Timely and when he started working at Marvel, there was a shift from making stories about random monsters that people reacted to, and then making the stories about a person who is perceived as a monster, or is seen as the theoretical antagonist by virtue of having powers. So it's this thing where he went from random one issue character to all these different people that have abilities. So I hope that answers that. Maybe I will say I have read some of the earlier issues of Amazing Spider-Man. They're really I still find them entertaining. They have that lingo of oh, you're farting in a tornado and all that, but they're products of their time that I think somebody, if they're interested in seeing the first appearances of various characters, would be able to go and look at and read and still appreciate and like them for what they are. But I did find it interesting how he had all these characters and just didn't keep up with what ended up happening to them in later decades. And people were genuinely surprised with it. I said, if I made 5 or 6 different long running franchises where all the characters have some book that's in issue 300, 400, 500, I don't think I'd remember everything about them at all either. So I will say we will not see in this current climate of you make one character and maybe that gets big and then oh my god you've blown up. We will not see a person like him ever again. And that's really a sad thing because when again as I mentioned Dirk, I had never read any of the comics because of the movies. Well, we could actually theoretically do a stream where I just read some of the and pull them out and put them in front of the camera and all that. But whether you want to do that or not is up to you. I'm used to the other content that we usually have. But going back to what I was saying, you won't see someone like him again that comes around and makes loads and loads of characters, just because it's what he has to do for his company, and they all happen to get really huge and popular at some point or another, and that person lives to see it or otherwise is around for it in a period of several decades. That's something that you won't be able to watch or witness because the way that comics are set up now, ironically enough, is like how we have the Democrats and Republicans, where it's two big corporations or two competing entities, and they prop up the same older figures, and no one from the bottom can ever really come around and actually introduce themselves or their idea. Who's the last Marvel or DC character you've seen get their own main series book where it's just about them and it lasts for more than 20 or 30 issues and they came out in the last maybe 10 years? Nobody. The only Marvel character I've seen get any real popularity that wasn't from the era of the 60s, and I might even be wrong about this, was Deadpool. Other than that, it's all people that Stan created, except for Captain America, but that's still someone that's from that earlier period. That's even further back. So I say that not to really bemoan, what he did at all, but it is to say that we now live in an era where we can't get someone like that based off of what both of the big two publishing companies decided to do. A ton of characters he made as an yeah, I agree. Yeah, Dirk, I out of all of those read Spider-Man the most. I have a lot of I guess knowledge of that character more than any other superhero in my opinion. But I also own the most stuff relating to that character. He made a framework that is easy to make but hard to make successful. Yeah, just the idea of I'm gonna sit here and very quickly make all of these characters, and I have to do this to meet a bottom line, and it happened to really work for him. But I'm saying that now that Marvel has decided to keep propping up the same ones that they know work, we're never going to get anything or anyone new. So I'm saying that with both Marvel and DC, you typically see characters that are famous or otherwise known by loads and loads of people by virtue of how long they've been around and by virtue of the company propping them up and making them be the people that are most frequently seen in media. If you understand what I'm trying to convey here. So for example, as I mentioned before, out of all the heroes that he made, the only one that I've seen that's not from that period of the 60s that has accumulated the same kind of cult following as Deadpool. And that is disturbing to think that the best this company could create, basically between the 60s and now, they can't come up with anything new. Say hello to Elliot, who disappeared, like Jimmy Hoffa. Happened to Dirk. The main person I was chatting back and forth with. Trying to see how I can conclude this. I'd probably say that it's disappointing that he died, but it's still good that whatever did happen to Jimmy, we don't know what happened to him. That's the point. The answer to that, Elliot, is no, and I can give those reasons somewhere else. I just typically don't make this kind of content because I don't know if it appeals to the people who regularly see any of the other stuff. Um, so that's what was, do I want to talk about this? But I thought, maybe I'll try to go off of what I remember from when I was sitting there and reading this stuff years ago or when I first became interested in it, and then see if it, gains any kind of traction. I'm glad Dirk came back. Envoy. Let's see if I answered your question about what happened to him. We have no idea. He was declared dead in absentia. Absentia, however you pronounce that. Yeah. I'm saying he's the only Marvel character that is a hero that I've seen get or rather not a complete villain, the same level of attention that the other big iconic ones like Spider-Man, Hulk, Captain America, Iron Man, the X-Men, Fantastic Four. He's the only one I've seen be able to get on that kind of level. I've seen a couple of villains, pull it off, like Venom or Carnage. But other than that, it's pretty much that same group from the 60s. It's like the X-Men movies where you have all these characters and then they keep focusing on the same five over and over. Like, oh, Colossus was in 8 movies. Yeah, how many lines do you have? About 12, 13? But every movie's about Cyclops, Phoenix, Wolverine, and Professor X and Magneto. By virtue of the writers thinking that that's who sells. No. Let me go look it up. I actually don't remember the writer. Let me see. No, but I'm fully interested in doing this kind of content if people would actually watch it. Yeah, Fabian Nicieza, how you pronounce his last name. But that's who created Deadpool, and Rob Liefeld. So I take that back. Rob Liefeld's the one who created them, and then the other. I have a thing about these artists getting co-credit for making a character. Like, oh, I drew this, okay, but the other person's mind was what made that. Whatever. Going to show you how much Marvel and Stan are tied together when it comes to successful characters, cameos, movies of characters he didn't even create. Yeah, well, that just kind of became a thing where they were used to, you know, they they knew that people expected him to be in those films, so they just kept shoving him in there. And there is the argument that Deadpool is having to do with the X-Men, but that because of Cable, but whatever. Just saying. Do you think I'm mad that I believe the Avengers are evil? Yeah, they had a. That's the whole point of Dark Avengers. It was bad guys as superheroes. It was Green Goblin as Iron Man in the Iron Patriot costume, which looked cool in my opinion. Then you had the third Venom, Mac Gargan, who was also the Scorpion as Spider Man. Yeah, the whole point was having evil versions of superheroes as that team. Let's see here. I do like Dirk saying that Deadpool wasn't even an original character. I will say the one thing that Stan was never able to quite replicate, like for example, the Justice League is way more iconic than Avengers, but because of the lack of success of that film, a lot more people are going to now be more acquainted with the Avengers than with Justice League by virtue of the movies doing as well as they did. I will say the one thing he could never quite replicate for DC is having an iconic female. Like a lot of people know Fantastic Four, but a lot of people would never say that they like Invisible Woman that much. Um, Pretty much outside of Storm, most of the chicks are kind of like you have to know the books to know who that is for the most part. And now all these people like Black Panther because of that movie. So that just shows you how it's this thing where back then a writer could just write a book and it could get popular because you didn't have TV and the internet and all these other things to distract people. But now it seems the best way to market whatever book you're writing is to get it into a film, and that requires millions of dollars. And Jesus, you get the idea. So we'll close this out. I intended to speak about the Ojeda announcement yesterday, or rather today earlier, more because of the actress. Oh yeah, Dirk. I think a lot of people like the actress more than they know about the character, who they actually did end up changing around a lot, in my opinion, from actually reading stories that she was involved in, including dropping the Russian accent, but whatever. So we'll do something tomorrow, possibly a stream, depending on if I feel like it. But yeah, this news sucks. I'm just glad he lived as long as he did, and got to see his stuff be successful. So have a good night.